So we're really pleased to have Peter van Garderen with us today. In 2005, Peter was working on his dissertation at the University of Amsterdam and attempting to answer the question, can the integration of institutional archival collections with personal digital archives create new or enhanced collective memories? If so, how? He began to conceptualize an institutional archive system where authority records linked to archival descriptions with various access points could be searched and browsed. In 2007, he created an access system and released it as free and open source software known as ICA Access to Memory, or ICA AtoM, or ICA A2M. I've heard it all different ways. In 2009, his consulting practice, Artifactual, began to primarily provide support for AtoM. At the same time, he began work on a digital preservation component that could be integrated with AtoM, known as Archivematica. This uses open source tools and microservices to preserve digital content. Most recently, Peter has been working on Arcly, which uses blockchain technology for digital archives management, drawing on hashes used by blocks, which can be associated with files that can then be retrieved from an online location. We're so very happy that Peter could be with us today. And Peter, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Mary Grace. Well, that's a very accurate and probably the most accurate introduction I've ever had. You really nailed that. I didn't know you had done that. Yeah, I'm really, first of all, I was just thought it was such a great moment. I actually adopted two kittens last week. And a very popular slogan we've had and continue to have for AtoM is, and talking about open source software, is free as in free kittens, right? So I've got free kittens, which I'll talk about in a minute, why we use that terminology. But yeah, it's a real honor and pleasure to be asked to just reflect on AtoM back in the day and where it is now. And so it's really nice to see Glenn present from the point of view of the community. Glenn is an OG. He's been there since the very early days. The two original institutions that actually took the leap of faith and jumped on the AtoM bandwagon with me was the City of Vancouver Archives and the Archives Association of BC. I see a few other. I think I see David Uhas, one of the original developers, another OG in the house. We've got Amanda Hill from at the time was working on the Ontario catalog, did a lot of work with us. So it's just really nice to be able to look back and reflect back on those days. I'm sorry if I've forgotten, and I can't see everybody that's in the call right now, but nothing was for granted back then. Like it very much was a project that came out of my PhD research. I was doing a PhD at the University of Amsterdam at the time, and Mary Grace summarized the thesis I was working on. That thesis never got finished, unfortunately. The actual work of creating the software and supporting the software became my primary mission after a short time, and I decided to devote all my energy to that instead. But yeah, early on, there's a few things that inspired me. When I got out of grad school at UBC Archival Information Studies, I was hired by a local software developer that made archive software. It was still very much the commercial vendor model that people were used to in the early 2000s, where you paid for modules, you paid for license fees. And I was pretty frustrated working there early on when I was the archivist representative trying to help other archivists use our product, where in many cases it was like, well, you can use our product better, but you have to buy this module, or you have to add this, you have to buy additional license fees to do this, that, the other thing. And it was disheartening. And it's like, I knew my other fellow classmates had graduated, was working in institutions. I knew that either if you're working in a community archives, you don't have a very large budget and you have to do things like hold bingo nights to raise money for software. And that was one actual call I took at one point at the vendor. They were like, we had a successful bingo night, like, now we can afford to buy this module. And it was still only a fifth of the price of the module. And otherwise, if you're working at a large institution, you're kind of captive to these annual budget cycles, which just makes it very limited when you can actually take action on buying and procuring software, installing it, as well as then dealing with your own IT department and getting support for that one of those moves. So there was a number of things in the air at the time that made me think that this might even be possible. The other big thing, this might be hard to believe, but it was actually a big deal 20 years ago, 15 years ago even, to try to get your finding aids online. Like just getting your finding aids, which if you had an electronic copy of it, it would probably be in a word processing document that you printed out and put it in a binder and you put it in your reading room. This idea that somebody could actually go to a website and search your finding aids and and look at it in context, like was kind of was a novel concept. And archives, I think, have always been a bit of the poor cousin to libraries and museums. And I saw things happening in those sectors where there were some larger vendors that were introducing products. But archives are being left out of that game. So I've always loved IT. I still love IT. It gets me up in the morning. I love learning about new technology, implementing new technology, using it to make a difference in the world. So I was also, in addition to being an archives graduate, very interested in the free and open source movement, which was really starting to take off at that time. And the big deal at that time was Web 2. Everybody kept talking about Web 2.0, this idea that we don't have to rely on institutions or companies to put data online. You can actually join a site like Facebook, which was all brand new at the time as well, or users were creating their own content and linking it back to organizational content or commercial content. And so all of those things were kind of in the milieu at the time where I was going through these different stages in my career. I became more and more involved locally here in Vancouver, where I'm based, in the free and open source software movement. And a really big platform at the time was called Drupal and WordPress. They're still around today as well. So which made it basically easy for people to create blogs and post stuff online. And this was all part of this Web 2.0 movement. So that's where I spent a few years after I left the software vendor. I worked for a while I was the original Interparse research coordinator. I did that job for 2.5 years, and then branched out and became my own consultant and was working as a consultant to archives, helping them figure out their technology, and starting to get more and more frustrated by the fact that there wasn't a cheap, easily accessible open source solution for archives. And that's when the idea for AtoM first emerged. It was a practical need. I was doing work in my PhD research. I wanted to show how we could combine institutional systems with personal systems and blend those two things. I never quite finished and accomplished that, although it's still very much of interest of mine. But what I started with then was, okay, let's start on the institutional end. What would that look like? What if we made something like a Drupal or a WordPress for archives? And that was the original concept for AtoM, and that's how it started. And so I'm sharing the screen right now with one of the very early interfaces, maybe the second or third version of what it looked like. It's still very, very rudimentary and basic. In fact, it's using a font from the City of Vancouver archives, like I mentioned earlier, one of our early believers, and Glenn included. But just this concept here in and of itself, this idea that I could put up a finding aid and I could link it, I could have hyperlinks out to an authority file. I could have hyperlinks and a hierarchical tree showing the hierarchy of the font and having lower level descriptions for the font in clickable, content addressable format. And even better, if those happen to be digital pictures, I should be able to show them in a little carousel, and you can flip through them and look at the pictures, which is what people really were after. I think probably still today, it's still the most popular thing people are actually looking for when they come to archive sites, is historical photographs. Then back with a bit of a search engine, allowing it to categorize the content and add full text indexing to it. Just putting all that together and presenting it really struck a nerve and a chord, I think, with fellow archivists, that we didn't have something like this at the time. There was something called Archivist Toolkit, was only just starting in the US. That was one of the predecessors of what's now Archivespace. So this was really kind of a novel thing. And my colleagues and my fellows, archival studies graduates, were really keen on this kind of option, and the fact that we could do something like this. And so the journey began. And it wasn't easy. It was a lot of struggles at the beginning to get sponsorship. So like I said, it's free software. I very much believed in this idea of allowing archivists to own their own technology. And that meant that we weren't charging license fees, and that somebody had to pay for my time and my developers' time, the developers I was beginning to hire, to put this product out there. And that continues to be the struggle today, to be honest with you guys. I think we heard just about institutions wanting to contribute code, but that takes time for people to review the code and integrate the code. And at the end of the day, that's all hours that people have to get paid to work. You can only get so far in volunteer hours. I think that was one of the misnomers, or one of the conceptions we had early days of free and open source, is that we would get this crowd of people would flock to your platform and would start creating and working for free and contributing code. We learned pretty early on that's not the case for most open source software, but definitely not for institutional software like archival description software. So actually, why don't I'm ranting a little bit, so I just want to stop there for a second. If anybody has any questions about those early days, please put up your hand. Oh, I see something in chat going on. Let me know if there's anything I can answer. So yeah, the very positive feedback at the beginning. I think to this day, still I get people telling me like that, the current version of AtoM still is very much in demand and solves a very practical problem for archivists trying to make their finding aids and their collections accessible. But just the idea that you could click a link through a finding aid that wasn't just a static document or a binder in a hard copy binder in your reading room, was actually a powerful idea, which is really strange. 15 years, 17 years on, it seems like common sense, of course. So where to go from there? So I'm gonna take a sip of my coffee, like I need any more coffee. I think the other thing I was really focused on at the time was making things standards based. So some of the early consulting work I did made me realize that individual institutions, archival repositories, were quite often creating their own tech stack and building their own solutions and working with whatever their institution had. If you were at a university, you were probably going to use something that the university library had put together for digital collections. If you're at a state or provincial archives or like a large municipal archives, you would likely have one of the commercial products from the vendors that were available at the time. And none of these were very interoperable. And I learned pretty early on working in InterPARS, especially as well, that's the whole point of standards. Is we created archival standards. The International Council on Archives created standards to make our collections more interoperable, accessible, and allowing the tech to be more portable from one institution to the next. And that really was missing. And so the other kind of really important soapbox I was on at the time was to say, like, we need a platform that actually implements standards without the users having to think too hard about how that works. It should just work out of the box. So that was the other big driver and selling point for AtoM early on, was to essentially take at that point then, the international standards. Those early days, there was quite a bit of competition from the American archival community. So welcome to, I'm Canadian, welcome to our American friends here. But at the time, and maybe still today, you could argue that a lot of like what wasn't developed in the US, so we don't support it. Like it doesn't support EAD, it doesn't support DAX before DAX was even a thing. There was this kind of a little bit like there was the US and the rest of the world, but the thing was most of the funding was in the US, especially from the university libraries. So there was some very good technology being produced like DSpace and Fedora, and then later on from Archivist Toolkit to Archive Space, that was better from a technology point of view, but necessarily wasn't that great from supporting international standards. So in order for our little project to compete and be relevant, I made the strategic move to partner with the International Council on Archives, so that this little open source project that out of Vancouver could get the national, international attention from other archival institutions, and say that if you adopt this platform, simply by turning the key and turning it on, you will become compliant with International Council on Archives standards. And we also support EAD, so that the finding aids that you create can be exported and imported as EAD finding aids and thus shared amongst institutions. And most importantly, I guess then in union lists, provincial, federal union lists, and so forth. So that was really the two most important things for me. Three most important things was having something that brought archives forward into the web world, something that was open source, that had lower costs for entry. Not saying that there isn't, obviously there's the free kitten analogy applies there, like it costs money to run technology and maintain it, but it still lowered the barrier there cost-wise without having to buy commercial licenses to use software and continue to pay those licenses year after year. And then the other one was standards adoption. So that really to prove the theory, because we had the ICA standards were around already for quite a few years at that time, and I was looking at them closely in my PhD research, but I was really frustrated to see that institutions weren't adopting them when that was the whole idea. It was like, let's create international standards now so that we can create this interoperability across the globe. And again, to prove my thesis, or to work on my thesis, of this idea that we should be able to integrate our memory from archival collections across institutions across the world, and connect them to private personal archives and personal experiences. we needed standards to do that. And I think that still argument still holds true today. So those, I think, were the three key drivers in the early years of AtoM to really champion those particular causes. And I like to think that's still the case today. I think if you choose to use AtoM, you get those three things. You get something that's web native, you get automatic integration with archival standards, and you get to own the technology. And so we know as well then, the other big key factor for me for owning technology is that you have to take ownership. Like Johan was describing, like the institution went along, created its own book in, book out modules and so forth. That's beautiful. That was exactly the point. Was you don't, this is the most core pieces of what you want from an archival finding aid solution are here. But then you have the power, because this is free and open source software, to get under the hood, to tinker, and to make changes to that software to make it suit your institution's needs. And then an ideal loop, which is I think what Johan is talking about here, is to also then reintroduce those enhancements back to the community for the benefit of the community as a whole, so that we take our limited budgets that we have in the archival space and stretch the dollar as far as we can by not overpaying for features, or have every archival institution pay a vendor for the same features over and over again. We get one investment, whether that's joint or pooled money, but one-time cost gets taken care of, a new feature gets added, and it becomes available down the line for other users. And that was the working theory, that's how we should be able to move a platform forward. And here we are 17 years later, still working on this platform. So I'm a proud father. Like, I have 3 teens myself, and a lot of times when I think about this technology that I was able to start, and just reminiscing with you guys now about how it started, it gives me obviously a lot of pride to think that we made it this far. It's not perfect. It's not the best. Well, it's the best. Yes, it's the best. It's not the best at every feature that we offer. But it's pretty darn good, and it still continues to be pretty darn good, and helps. Again, I talked to a lot of archivists that are happy to work with it, that it really supports their workflow, the way they need to make their collections accessible, and providing that access to memory as they are held in archival collections. The other big thing that I was concerned about was that we were seeing all this advancements in IT, but I felt like archives and archivists were kind of being left behind. And then we were having to, and we obviously continue to deal with this really major challenge of digital preservation. How do we preserve archival collections that are born digital or been converted to digital? And how do we tackle that piece of the puzzle? And that's where I was involved in Interparis in the early years to kind of develop the theory around how we do digital preservation. But I was quite frustrated that we weren't seeing any actual applications being put forth that archivists on the ground could use for that. And so some of the original documents I had for when I first proposed AtoM had a fully integrated platform where preservation access was part and parcel of the same system. And just by nature of having to make do with what we had, and dealing with and working with different technical stacks and limited budgets, what happened was that we created at Artifactual, the consulting company that I started. I was doing this consulting work through, and then this development work through eventually. Started working on a separate solution, but was always meant to be integrated from the beginning, and which came to be called Archivematica, which was the digital preservation backend. And so I think, again, just coming back to the open source evangelism, for me, it was very important to have an open source solution that did access and preservation, so that archivists could empower themselves and teach themselves, have more ownership of the technology. I think it's almost a given these days, but at the time it was still a bit of an uphill battle to convince people that were used to the commercial vendor model and weren't quite sure about this hippy dippy open source stuff, free software. These guys really know what they're doing. But my opinion was always that by giving archivists access to the technology and working under the hood, whether they did it themselves or with developers in their own shop, in their own organization, would get more ownership and knowledge of how the technology actually worked, more so than you would when you get something spoon-fed from a vendor, and these days, I guess, by a cloud-based solution where you don't have any access to what's happening under the hood. And I felt there was a mission there, and continues to be, for archivists to educate themselves about how to manage digital collections and manage their preservation. And I think one of the best ways is simply to get your hands dirty and get a little bit more involved in installing and using and configuring and upgrading a free open source software platform. I think they were 2 different timelines, and the two products now are Artifactual and other consultants are working on how to best integrate Archivematica with AtoM. And there's some really, I myself worked on a number of those things in my last few years at Artifactual to try to bridge that gap and make the 2 platforms a little more integrated. so that preservation and access were part and parcel of the same platform. But due to the nature of some technical debt and other kinds of things, I think there's still a little bit, maybe that's one of those things I think I wish I could have handled a bit better. And from early on was to integrate the preservation access piece closer together. But that said, of course, anybody that's running Archivematica and AtoM together is working on a world-class stack of software, and doing much better than they would if they didn't have those platforms available to them. I think the other kind of, I don't know, like kind of like looking back at the day, like there was never any guarantees that this was going to work out, like that we were going to be sitting here at a user group meeting with 60, 70, I don't know how many people are on the call right now, people using the software and representative of a larger community of users. So I very much appreciated the good faith that organizations like Glen City, Vancouver, Archives Association, British Columbia, and a number of other, I was doing a lot of consulting at the time for digital preservation at the World Bank. They were one of the original, allowed me some time to work on this as well. And that's one of the places where AtoM is installed today. But taking a leap of faith in this idea that we could do this together. And it's that also means it's not necessarily easier. Like if, some cases, commercial vendor software can be a bit slicker, can move a bit faster, because they have, VC funding in their hand and can hire larger teams of developers. But for me, it was always about empowering archives and archivists to own their own technology and make the decisions as a community on how to move that technology forward. And I'm really proud to see that, that's what's happened. I would argue that AtoM has its own culture. It's got its, just simply by the series of stickers that have been produced over the last 10 years, celebrating the AtoM platform. There's definitely there is a community, like we can call it a community. This is a community. We're on a community call right now. And that was really important to me. That was not something that we took for granted. That didn't exist. And this idea of creating this community, providing user support to paying clients, to non-paying clients, and building this capacity within the archival community was again one of my objectives. And it's not 10 out of 10 in all these different categories, but I think we can look back and say we've accomplished something together as a community. And I think that's if I want to start open up the call to some questions if people have them. But I think that going forward, I think we have to remember that we can go further, together than we can alone, right? Maybe it takes a couple of extra steps sometimes. But really the power of a free open source platform is the community ownership and support and vision that you put together as a community to move the platform forward. So I think I want to maybe leave it at that and open up the questions, and I'm happy to answer any you got.
Thank you so much, Peter. I think we all love AtoM because it is a standards-based system, but you've mentioned some other important things that we maybe don't always think about, which is that it empowers archivists and it builds community. So those are really significant points. Marina, you have a question in the chat. Do you feel it was answered, or do you want to speak to that? Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mariana. So I did answer it, but I can expand on that a little bit. So Marina asked, Peter, could you please speak to the ICA involvement in the early stages of the project and that vision of an archival database for all types of archival institutions? So I was very lucky early on to be kind of mentored by Peter Horstman from, at the time, was the Dutch Archiefschool in the Netherlands, which was a training institute similar to a graduate school for training archival graduates to work in the profession. And he supported me early on with this work. I did some contract work for him, and I started talking to him about my vision for this open source software. And he was one of my PhD advisors. And so he was the critical link back to the ICA. He had done some work earlier on for the ICA where he had defined a set of functional requirements for a digital archive system that then was implied that once you had somebody should build that, but nobody was building it. So he was quite happy to have this kind of young upstart myself coming in there all with a lot of energy and excitement about what we should be doing for the archival institution, for archival profession with this platform. And so he introduced me. We went on a train from Amsterdam to Paris, and I had a PowerPoint slide and convinced the ICA that they should get involved with us to promote this platform because it would support their standards and basically all the arguments I gave here. And so we had one or two people within the ICA secretariat that were quite supportive. But then over the early years, we had a lot of friction trying to get move it forward via the ICA because there was, first of all, again, there was, I mean, archivists are a very entrenched profession. And again, this is one of the things I was trying to change and hopefully, have a bit of a catalyst for change for that. But this idea that somehow the ICA would sponsor software was very novel and revolutionary almost, that a lot of people couldn't get behind or support. And then the question became, well, why would we support this software and not another software? And what do we actually own? It's like, why are we giving it away? Like this, it's hard to think that today that people were really questioning and doubtful about the open source model back in the early days. I mean, let alone organizational procurement departments that couldn't understand this idea that you weren't that the software, the IP was owned collectively. So we struggled. Like, so early years, I found some additional funding from some other organizations early on, and we funneled that additional funding through the ICA. So that the ICA, we tried several times and several rounds to set up oversight committees within the ICA that would kind of provide direction for us and kind of provide that guidance for both budgeting and procurement of funds for new development and moving the platform forward with features and checking the boxes that, yes, the ICA has said that ICA AtoM is in fact compliant with the ICA standards. That was very important, and I think it was very important early on to get that credibility. So I don't discount that. I think that was part of the key success factor for making this platform actually get some legs behind it and get breathe some life into it. But then for many years as developers, we felt that our hands were tied quite a bit by the long delays between trying to move forward with new features that people were asking for on the ground. We were an open source project. Our user support forum were open 24/7. People were really desperate to move the platform forward. And then we would have months-long process of reports and feedback from ICA committees where then every 2 years, somebody else would get elected again and we'd deal with a whole new crop of people. So early years, I want to thank the people that were involved and really supported us early on and saw that vision. But then we decided at some point, I decided that the only way this is going to survive if we cut that cord and move forward as the lead developers as Artifactual Systems, which was the company I founded in Vancouver and still the lead developer for the platform today. Made that move forward on its own, and by that point, we had enough of a user base to make that leap. So the early support of ICA was very critical. It wasn't always easy working with them, but they were definitely part and parcel of the early success in getting the platform launched. Does that answer the questions? Oh, so yes. Okay, cool. Another question from Johan. Are you worried that RIC will make AtoM irrelevant? No, I don't. I see there's, again, this is very, AtoM's been involved very early on and has made a number of investigations as far as steering the platform towards, our records in context being a linked data standard for archival description, resource description framework type idea. So that, which would be essentially is a different data model for how to store the data and how to share it. I think Artifactual invested some funds early on to actually figure out how to make the wholesale change to something like RIC. And again, ran into a number of roadblocks with how that would work and bringing along a technical debt that we have. Debt's a dirty word, technical legacy we had with the existing platform and moving it forward. I see RIC very much as an interchange format similar to EAD. I think the two can work hand in hand. I think if the institution believed enough in RIC that they wanted to make that a core part of the the AtoM data model, then we would need to see an investment from that institution to put forth the funding that's required to make that switch, to make the backend, the actual data storage component of the AtoM system RIC compliant. But I think a simpler solution is simply to continue to maintain the original data model and use RIC as an interchange format similar to how we use EAD. That doesn't necessarily give it all the benefits you would get from search and discovery, but I think those are all things you can architect around. So no, I see very much would like to see as RIC move forward. And of course, the question mark, of course, becomes who's using it, who wants it, what is it? Is it a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, or what is the actual problem that it's solving? Can it do it better than the current formats and standards? And I think that remains an open question. I think myself personally, I love linked data. I think RDF is the future. I've been working a lot with it myself outside of the archive space. But again, it's we have to move the whole community forward together, and to make a sudden drastic switch to RSC data model would not benefit the community.
And Peter, there's a follow-up from Kelly. Kelly, did you want to just speak to this?
Yeah,
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
actually, yeah, I
Oh,
think she said the same thing. Hi, Kelly, go ahead.
hi. Yeah. Thank you for everything you've done. I feel like the Canadian community would not have standardized machine actionable data if it wasn't for AtoM. So thank you. Yeah, I just feel like if the AtoM community was to move towards RIC, we would be asking people who self-host to also be, building like graph databases, which is beyond the funding of most archives.
Yeah.
So I just like what you kind of said, that like what problem is it actually solving? Because even if we're producing RIC data, it doesn't mean there's any discovery benefit. So wondering about your take on forcing archives into a standard that kind of the benefit of it would require a graph database. And I'm also curious what you think about AtoM not supporting IIIF.
Um, I think I can't speak for artifactual staff now. I haven't been involved in day-to-day operations for a number of years now. But I think supporting IIIF within AtoM would be very much welcome with open arms as someone who's able to provide that funding and actually develop that piece. I think that's been the missing link, the missing piece there, as far as I understand it. Um, and but I think that's a lower hanging fruit in my opinion than the RIC, and actually has, I think, especially in archival access and discovery systems, I think has more direct impact, like being able to, all the things that IIIF gives you for making your digitized content more accessible, searchable, discoverable, scalable. I think that if I had to choose, if somebody said, here's some money to either introduce RIC and add it to AtoM, or IIIF and add it to AtoM, I would jump at IIIF right away. I think it solves a more concrete problem. And yeah, I think you kind of said the same thing there, Kelly. Like that, I think the way it would work is if we simply created a graph database on top of AtoM, and had that. And again, if we can involve the lead developers artifactual, you could have some really tight integration there, or just simply loosely coupled, making its own discovery system. But it's I think the one thing that's fine, like I mean, when I first learned about semantic web and linked data and RDF, as a technologist, the lights went on. Of course it's a better technical solution to so many data storage, data retrievability, discoverability, portability, self-describing, all this stuff. It's really is a sound, very interesting technology, and I still believe there's a future for it. But we've been saying that for 15 years and or more, and the graph databases that have emerged are also very commercial. The open source ones, people struggle with to understand. And I think the one thing that's changing all that now is its implementation and use in artificial intelligence pipelines, in AI LMM models, where what we're seeing is, like, we know there's a lot of hallucinations in LMM models, and then there's a verification step where projects are now using graph databases to sprawl out and say, give me everything you know about this topic and come back and tell me whether this is true or not, or whether this data is supported, or whether there's anything that the LMM model produced is in fact accurate or not. So I think we've seen more money put into and more talent put into making RDF more palatable in the last 2 years because of its AI model implications. And I'm hopeful that that means it's going to, like with most technologies, once it needs to have a mainstream somewhere, and then more money pours in, more users pour in, and that all trickles down eventually to, more capable open source software for those kind of technologies. And so I would hope that oh, okay, so yeah, so I have high hopes that we will see the day of semantic web yet in archival description. I just saw the update that I'm not aware of that. Again, I don't represent Artifactual anymore, so I don't know what the decision making was behind the IIIF. But I could tell you that from my experience, most often it was that if the full costs were not capable of being recovered, then that was usually the issue. So maybe institutions were able to pay up, but maybe not the full cost. But I shouldn't dive into that, or the details of that argument, because I'm not aware of them and why that isn't happening right now. Myself personally, I'm a huge fan of IIIF, so that's and I think it has a lot of potential for making our collections more accessible and usable. And I think at the end of the day, that's what this has been about from day one. It's like, well, the finding aids were stuck in binders and reading rooms. and I saw a need to get them on the web. And so I developed a platform with the help of lots of other people to get these finding aids on the web. Now they're on the web. What's the next step? It's like, well, can we make things more self-discovering, more interconnected? Can we create more links between archival collections? And because I think a lot of archival collections stand on their own, they don't integrate well with other technologies. Whereas obviously there's huge benefit to open up archival collections to including things like AI graph databases that are doing fact checking, for example. So I don't know the history behind that particular path, but if I was in the room, I would be speaking in support of going the IIIF route.
Thank you. I wish you were still there. But yeah, thanks. And what you said about LLMs is reminding me, there's a lot of work in Australia going on around retrieval augmented processes. So maybe
That's exactly it. That's what I was talking. Yeah, that's the right retrieval augmented graphs, like or RAGs they call them, right? So
yeah. So maybe that's where Rick will fit. Who knows?
I think so. Well, or at least benefit from that technology, because all the graph database companies, they were really fringe companies, fringe technology for many, many years. And it kind of survived with institutional academic backing and then without really any major commercial players. And that's really changed now in the last couple of years. There's a really thriving market now for knowledge graph products and services. So if I was a systems analyst working on this for an archives, I would be doing a deep dive into all that latest, greatest technology and how we could leverage that and use the free open source pieces. And I mean, it's like a rising tide raises all boats, right? Like there's more documentation, there's more people talking about using knowledge graph for RAG. There's more articles to read about it. There's more companies are advertising and presenting their products so it feels like to me like the corner has really been turned in the last couple of years for semantic web data, whatever you want to group and loop with that, lump in with that. So I would, yeah, for all of the people on this call here, I'm sure you represent the technologists in your organizations. That's why you're on an AtoM user group call and sitting down listening to the old timer talk about the old days. It's probably because you love technology like I do, right? And there's something empowering about using technology and seeing what it can do and how it can enhance your work and how it can enhance our role and our purpose as archivists, which is to put these great collections we're managing and on behalf of the general public, making them more accessible, more usable, more retrievable, more powerful, and especially in a day and age like today, where there's so many questions around, what is truth, what isn't, what is fact, what isn't. I see archives playing a critical role at some point in this kind of fact-finding mission, but not if we're working on platforms that don't connect to the latest technology. And so that's encouraging progress, I think, from the commercial side of the knowledge graph space. Then how would we implement RIC on top of something like AtoM to take advantage of that and make the collections more accessible? I think to me, that's if I was a PhD student today, that's what I would be working on. That's instead of creating that web-based archival description software. I think that's the really ripe area of innovation right now and making our profession and our collections more relevant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Does anybody else have any questions or comments for Peter? Just raise your hand. This is your big chance. Okay, Holly, did you want to speak to that or?
Yeah, Holly says, Peter, could you please speak to the future visioning of AtoM and possible answers to current challenges? So again, I don't want to shortchange any of the work that's been done by you guys, this community here, and the people at Artifactual. I haven't been involved in the day-to-day visioning and planning for the AtoM platform for a while now. So I don't want to what I will say is that I fully believe and trust that team over at Artifactual. They are doing the very best they can and more with the funding and capabilities that they have put in front of them, and we always have. Like we always consider ourselves archivists making tech for archivists. Like we weren't a bunch of software vendors trying to get the last little scraps of sense out of the archives community. Artifactual exists, and I think if you look at the roster, the amount, I think we're the number one employer of graduates from UBC school ever, and so that rings true to our philosophy, which was always like we are archivists working for archivists. So I would trust, again, like not being involved day to day, being involved in other projects now in other spaces. But I would first and foremost always take take what the Artifactual team is planning and visioning, and would start with that. Like I'm certain it's done in good faith and with the best intentions for what is available from a resource perspective. Myself personally, like I've been really involved in the decentralization space, so what you might call blockchain or crypto world. And I still very much I consider myself as an archivist in that space. That's kind of my agenda. That's how I present myself when I do public speaking in that space. I'm like, hi, I'm an archivist. I come from the archives world. We're very concerned about authenticity and accuracy and making information retrievable, accessible, findable, trustable. And these are some of the principles and standards
Garbage.
Sorry, somebody said garbage, garbage. Gordon thinks that we don't believe that, or is he taking out the garbage right now? I'm not sure.
I think he's probably taking out the garbage. Please mute yourselves, everyone. Thank you.
Well, unless he's got something to say, I'm happy to talk, address his concerns about garbage.
No, it's okay. It was for my cat. Sorry, it wasn't for you. I'm sorry. I thought it was on mute.
That's hilarious.
My apologies, Peter. I didn't mean any disrespect. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm always open for a heated debate or open even like a clearly announced debate of ideas. And I thought you were reacting to me saying I work in the blockchain and crypto space, because a lot of people would say it is garbage. So I wasn't surprised, and I've had that conversation many times about whether there's actually something there. And I believe there is this. I think there's some different technology that is really sound for this issue we have in digital archives, digital preservation around authenticity. And I think it solves some really, really key problems. It's not a panacea. It's not like people have the hyperbole and hype around that it makes me kind of think a lot of it's garbage as well. But as an archivist working in that space, I think there's something there to be had, and that's why I eventually moved into that space and worked there as an archivist. I think the other reason I wrote an article in 2016 called Decentralized Autonomous Collections, and that was around the time I was making the switch to working in that space. One of the biggest issues I see, which you guys probably experience annually, is budgets. Is how much money is actually available to you to run a team of archivists, to pay artifactual or other developers or others IT to support the applications. Those funds are shrinking, and I think that's one of the biggest risks to maintaining publicly accessible archival collections that exist today. And so one of the things I've been trying to figure out is how can we leverage these decentralized blockchain type networks, which have financial incentives built in to keep machines running. How can we leverage that to actually maintain and provide access to archival collections beyond institutional support? And that, I mean, that's kind of I'm not doing a PhD, but that's very much been my working thesis for the last few years as I developed some projects and platforms to try to actually implement those ideas. So I still very much consider, even though I'm not haven't been an artifactual for a number of years, and I'm not directly involved with Archivatic and AtoM now for a while, I still very much see that mission. My mission hasn't changed. I'm still an archivist. It gets in your blood, and you can't get out of it, so you can't escape it. So I still in the blockchain decentralized space, I am the archivist. I am the guy that talks about the archival principles and figuring out a way that we can support the archival mission through this other kind of groundbreaking technology. Again, there is something there. I know there's been a lot of drama around, NFTs and all these other things, JPEG NFTs. But there is some core technology there that I think has something to offer to our space. And so I'm interested in working with that and trying to bring those two together. So, I mean, really what I do as a profession hasn't changed from 15, 20 years ago when I first graduated from archive school. It's still very much what new technology exists and how can I bring that technology to the archival community, to archival collections, to help foster and move forward the archival mission, which is to keep authentic and accurate memory data, information, records accessible to the public at large.
Okay, sorry, can I ask a question? Sorry,
of course,
I have a real question this time. And my cat is under control. It's not after my garbage anymore. Sorry. I'm an archivist. I teach in the School of Information Studies in McGill, but I'm basically an archivist. And I'm responsible for all digital archives, total digital. There's only digital elements in it. And I'm looking at, it's a research project, so we're looking at creating a finding aid and I've got students working on that. I'm looking, where do I put my finding aid? Do I try to get the university to put it onto AtoM, or do I look to Wikidata as an option, make it available via Google? What do you think about Wikidata? Is that does that have legs?
Ooh, tough question. So first of all, I would say yes, all three. So I think we kind of get trapped in this idea of like there's one place where people come to discover our collections. I think that's been proven like that's not the case. Like so if you have the capability and technical capability and the resources to get your data out, first of all, through your organization and its finding aids and its systems, that's so if your organization runs AtoM, 100%, I would say get those descriptions into your organization's AtoM. Um, Making things more search engine optimizable through so that Google and other search engines can find them is the other critical piece. Whether Wikidata has legs, this comes back to I think I've got to be careful because I have some friends that work closely with that platform and put a lot of time and energy into trying to introduce archives to the Wikidata universe. So Wikidata being a type of RDF-backed type platform where you have linked data triples and try to organize your data that way, but through a wiki interface. I personally haven't. I think it's struggled. I think it's again struggled to find the problem to that solution the solution that it offers. And I'm more optimistic that things like schema.org, which is like triple linked data put into that married with web-based records and documents. And so essentially any like HTML files having in the header information having linked data inside those documents rather than on a separate platform like Wikidata, I think has longer term legs, and it's also moving more towards where I see the commercial sector moving, like I described earlier with knowledge graph data for AI pipelines. So, but I don't want to discourage all the great work that's been done on Wikidata because again, I am an RDF true believer. So if it's gonna, I don't care where it works, it should work at some point. I think it will make our data more discoverable and forward compatible. But I don't know enough about recent status of Wikidata to really give you my true, honest opinion.
Great. Thanks for the question, Gordon. And does anybody else have a question before we close our meeting? I have one. I'm just wondering, Peter, about your thoughts about how can we reduce the environmental impact of digital preservation? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't like. I tend to be in the camp that it's relative. Like if you think about the so the amount of energy that's spent on proof of stake blockchains like Bitcoin, and now for the type of data centers we're seeing being built to support AI model generation, I think if we look at the actual total amount of energy output used for collections from public institutions for digital preservation, I know people have run the numbers and presented some very good arguments for how to reduce some of those costs, but I still think it's a drop in the bucket compared to other things. And I think we have to ask ourselves what's the relative benefit to public society, to public good, to keep information and digital collections accessible online. Like if that means a small percentage of the waste that's being output isn't that more important than the percentage of digital data that's being used to run TikTok or Twitch or like those aren't going away. So why can't we have our share of that quote unquote budget of energy consumption? And so to me, I tend to lean towards that. Like I think it's all relative. And I think given the limited time and resources and attention that we have to spend on keeping our digital collections accessible, like putting all that into the effort. Like, and again, I know I'm going to stir the pot here a little bit because I know people believe really strongly in this, and I have people that I know believe strongly in that. So that's my singular opinion, and I don't want to discount any of the excellent work people have been doing into making that issue more at the forefront. And maybe Glenn's amongst those. Hi, Glenn, go ahead.
Yeah, Glenn, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had to follow up with that. I mean, if you think about, I totally agree with you. Like the amount of energy using for digital preservation is a drop in the bucket compared to those other things. And if you look at what the actual energy cost for storage is, keeping digital data versus what it costs to operate a warehouse that's storing the equivalent amount, like take that and print it out onto paper and then store that. It's a fraction of that. I mean, you don't. I have never run the math on that in detail, but it's like what a gigabyte of information is going to occupy like a quarter of our archive space, like our physical holdings capacity, right? So it's um trivial what the difference is, or not trivial. It's staggering what the difference is between storing the paper stuff and storing the digital stuff. The fact that we're keeping too much of the digital stuff is a separate issue, but
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, does anybody else have anything they'd like to contribute, ask, talk about? Okay, so just want to say thank you so much to Peter, well, to Glenn as well, Glenn and Peter, for being here today. And especially to you, Peter, for all your hard work on developing an archive system that we all use and love, and that is the only one that can represent encoded archival function at this point. So, yay.
We never even talked about that. Yeah, that was part of the early battles as well, supporting standards, even ones that weren't necessarily that well developed yet. That's a point of pride as well. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I forgot about that, Mary Grace.
So thank you so much, Peter. Honestly, we're just so grateful to you. And it's been so nice to see our members of our joint US-Canada AtoM users group again today. And we'll be having another meeting in the spring. So I'll be sending out an announcement if you're not on the Google group to get announcements on the listserv. Please do join. And take care, everyone.
Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining.